Good morning from Zürich. You're listening to Monocle on Sunday with me, Tyler Brûlé. Coming up on today's program, my guest today, Nico Luchsinger is here, and also Gorana, Grgić, our security correspondent. I was just sort of checking her CV if that's still what she's doing. It is, and she's here. Good morning. I was sort of thrown by the new tunes, the new opener that we have. Anyway, very nice to see you off the back of Barcelona. Not much has happened this week in the world of security, it seems.
Not at all. Yeah, we made it back, and it's been a pretty bananas week, I would say. Security-wise, of course, my inbox has been all about Article 4 NATO being activated, given that Russian drones crossed deep into NATO airspace, but then plenty there with Charlie Kirk's assassination, and then news of different government turnovers from everywhere, from France to basically Nepal.
Exactly. Well, on that note, we're also going to be heading to New Delhi for the latest.
Good morning from New Delhi. I'm Lyndee Prickitt, and I'll be soon talking about India on the foreign stage, the massive and surprising GDP numbers, and a sizzling inheritance case that's playing out in the courts.
And we'll also be talking about the Zürich Film Festival as well a bit later in the program. It's the 14th of September, 2025, live from Zürich. This is Monocle on Sunday.
Live from Zurich, this is Monocle on Sunday with Tyler Brûlé.
And good morning from a rather damp Zurich. It's been pouring here probably since about midnight or so, but there's a bit of a promise of sunshine. It looks like, if we're to believe Meteo Schweiz. I know you're not buying it, Gorana, but anyway, happy to say that Nico Luchsinger is here. He is the executive director of the Asia Society, the Swiss branch, the Zurich office. Good morning first.
Good morning,
great to see you. We of course we know there's Asia Society branches around the world, but newish around the mics here. When you bump into somebody on a tram or a Cathay Pacific flight, you say you work for the Asia Society. What does the Asia Society do?
Well, thank you very much for having me. We live in a world that is increasingly influenced by Asian actors, whether that's governments or organizations or also Asian culture. And our job at the Asia Society Switzerland is to foster what we refer to as Asia competence, which is to help stakeholders here in Switzerland understand what those actors influence and how it's relevant to us.
Very good. Well, listen, there is much for us to get across today. We were talking a little bit earlier in the program. We're going to maybe be rewinding a little bit to talk about some of the events, both from a geopolitical perspective, economic as well. Also happy to say that Gorana Grgić is here, of course, our security correspondent, also a key figure, of course, over at ETH in their School of Security Studies. Good morning. Last time I saw you, was it on a dance floor in Barcelona, or no? It could have been before that. I'm not quite sure. Anyway, the last time I saw you, we were in that beautiful space, the La Paloma space in Barcelona, and now you're here.
I am indeed. And just of that, just to say hello to everyone who I've met in Barcelona. There are plenty of listeners, so you know who you are if I talk to you, and had a pleasure of meeting you. Hello. And we had a great event, and kudos to the entire Monocle team for putting it together. Quality of life was really good quality.
I think so, and it's a perfect cue to bring in our editor-in-chief, Andrew Tuck, who is with us in London this morning. Andrew, Gorana has a mystery letter from Canada, which was delivered to her. We haven't opened it yet.
Because anthrax.
Yeah, because we think it could be anthrax. Desi has not manned the scanning machine, not sure where it is. Should we open it or not?
I'd have a look. I think anybody who's writing to Gorana is going to be generous of heart. I don't fear the anthrax yet.
Okay, why don't we save it for the 58th minute of the program, so everyone can break for the doors. Andrew, good morning. How are you?
Very good, Tyler. And it seems still that the aftermath of the conference is hitting in numerous ways. Mostly, I'm pleased to say, in our inboxes, with just incredible response from people who came together in Barcelona for the Quality of Life conference. Many lingered in the city. Some of them came with us to Mallorca afterwards for another couple of days. But it's been, I think, the most extraordinary response to almost anything we've done. So incredible.
Well, I have to say, Andrew, that Jonathan de Cresta is here because there's a lot of things happened in Barcelona for sure. Also, we had the follow-up trip to Mallorca, which you led. There hasn't been a lot of photographic let's call it evidence of what's happened after hours. And I think that's why Jonathan is sort of giddily sitting on the end of his seat, because maybe there are photos to be revealed. What do you think?
Well, Jonathan came with me on part 2. And I think I can safely say he was pretty well behaved. Actually, he was a great companion to have in Mallorca. There may have been some other incidents, but that's not for the radio.
That's not for radio. Okay. Why don't we spin the globe very quickly? And we're going to start, Nico, with you. Look back, look ahead, or maybe where we're centered at the moment. But what has caught your eye? Where do you want to start story-wise today?
As Gorana has said, it's been a pretty bananas week. It's kind of hard to know where to start. Article 4, I think, is something we're going to talk about. And I think that has reverberations globally, including in Asia. I've been struck a little bit by sort of the convergence of quite a bit of unrest across different Asian countries. We've obviously seen protests in Nepal, which I think are notable also because they were strongly driven by Gen Z and anger over the social media sites being shut down. Thailand has a new prime minister, which in itself isn't that extraordinary. They have those quite frequently, but I do think it sort of points
more frequently than France. I was trying to do the math on that.
That's a good question. I think they're probably
France in the lead right now in terms of turnover. But anyway.
Yeah, so I think it kind of points to a deeper problem. Somebody recently told me Thailand went from being the Germany of Southeast Asia to being the Hungary of Southeast Asia, which I thought was nice because it's both very accurate but also incredibly mean. And then we have Indonesia, where no one's resigned. They're being toppled yet, but there are just strong protests on the street, and I think it points to possibly upcoming bigger problems under the new president, Prabowo. And then we have, which we also touched upon a little bit before, the India-China relationship. I know Lyndee's going to talk about that, so we can get into that, but I think that's something that's worth looking at in the follow-up to the Shanghai Cooperation Organization Summit in Tianjin, which happened 2 weeks ago.
Exactly. I think many areas there that we are going to probably settle on as well. Gorana, of course, the invocation of Article 4 off the back of this. Let's call it. Are we still calling it a drone incursion into Poland? Of course, just hearing the news headlines as well. Something similar happening also in Romania. Maybe one drone across the border, semi-permissible, but a swarm of them, perhaps not. Maybe.
Yeah, incursion is in the eye of the beholder, and then we go into the semantics between is it an incident or is it an attack, right? And incursion is somewhere, I guess, in the middle where we've settled. It just reminds me of that story of when is it that you start getting bald, right? When the first hair falls out of your head, or like 19 hairs, or like when you're down to one hair. Do you still consider yourself as having hair on your head, or what's happened? And that's kind of what we are dealing with at the moment with the different types of tests that Russia has been basically mounting against NATO. We can say since the full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 22, but actually it goes far beyond that. And if we think about the various sort of hybrid types of attacks, right, the sabotage, attempts of assassinations on different NATO member states' soil, then it does bear the question of how prepared NATO is to deal with these types of threats, right? And I think that at the moment, in the sort of NATO world, there is a vigorous debate about whether NATO responded appropriately, whether this is a complete failure of deterrence, right? That Russia feels so bold to actually launch 19 drones, which were flying for 7 hours, a couple of hundred miles actually into Polish airspace, right? This is not just one-off kind of, what President Trump...
It's not just 500 meters across the border.
No. It was 300 miles by some estimates. So fortunately, no one was killed, right? No one was injured. There were damages to property from some of this. But then the question is, when NATO scrambled together, actually for the first time, it was historic week as well, because for the first time in the alliance's history, this is now 76 years, right? NATO aircraft engaged in basically exchanging fire with hostile targets within Allied airspace. This has not happened during the entirety of the Cold War. 1. And 2, it is the first time since the beginning of the full-scale invasion that actually NATO shot down any Russian assets over its territory. So first time since 2022. So the question now, is deterrence enough? The sort of kind of messaging signaling that NATO is giving that Russia should not engage in this, or has it completely failed? And if it has failed, what can it do differently? And then the second thing, how does NATO actually deal with downing Russian drones should they, and if they continue to cross into NATO territory? Because, getting up F-16s, F-35s, billion-dollar worth aircraft to just down some, relatively cheap drones is not really a cost-effective way of engaging in this. And now the debate that has opened up is whether Poland, which is actually one of the most capable NATO allies, very close to the 5% GDP on defense, whether it's actually able to deal with this type of challenge and what NATO can do, and this whole idea of multi-layered defense, especially in the air. What is it that needs to be done? So some early steps have been taken, but it's going to be a continuing story.
Nico.
Yeah, I was actually going to ask a question. Am I allowed to do that?
Yeah, you're of course, absolutely.
So I totally understand this narrative that this was a Russian test, and I think as such it seems to have been incredibly effective. It showed that deterrence may not be enough. It showed that NATO isn't ready to really deal with such an incursion. Imagine if this had been hundreds of drones instead of 20 or so. It also showed that NATO isn't necessarily united. When we look at the response coming out of the White House, if you even want to call that a response. But I was wondering, and I'd love to hear what Gorana thinks of this, is could this also have been, looking back, a bit of a turning point? So could this end up being good because it actually made, at least for the European members of NATO, made it clear that they have to step up their game, right? It's better to do this now than when there's a real attack.
And I have a secondary question to that as well. So just very quickly, because we don't, because Andrew's toast is probably getting cold, or he's got some more in the toaster.
Sorry, Andrew.
But just very quickly as well, on the topic of the test, as you said, scrambling F-16s, scrambling F-35s, a bit of it, maybe a surprise about that. Of course, we don't know everything that happened, but when we know that it's sort of so much drone against drone right now, as you said, scrambling these very large aircraft, manned aircraft, does that almost seem a little bit out of date in terms of response as well?
Yeah, so and Andrew, very quickly, your avocado smash doesn't get all too soggy. So on the issue of threat and what it might do to the alliance, there are actually two schools of thought, right? One is that everyone's going to kind of rally around NATO, there's going to be more cohesion and unity. And that would be the best case scenario. There is also the other side, which, given what we've seen as the kind of fracturing in general over Ukraine, over the kind of extent of response and this sort of springing up of the coalition of the willing, because not everyone is willing to lean in maybe as much into supporting Ukraine. We do have these notable differences. After all, we have the major country that is underwriting NATO security, United States, questioning sort of the extent of its own involvement and how much Europeans should be sort of shouldering the burden. And this is basically where we are kind of stuck, because the kind of wake-up moment, as you referred to it, Nico, we don't know if this is going to be the wake-up moment. It has done something which was sort of predictable, and this is the announcement of this operation called Eastern Sentry, which basically aims to gather more information, which wants to better integrate what's already there and to bring some extra assets. We've already heard the French are sending some new jets. Germans are also stepping up their presence and so on. So there is a little bit more of the same rather than a kind of radical change, but there is this sort of sense we need to plug any kind of hole that's out there from, north of Finland to the south of Bulgaria, essentially, to kind of shore up the eastern flank. And then over to your question, Tyler, about the appropriateness of response. That's precisely the thing, right? How, and this is where actually Ukrainian sort of experience and lessons from the battlefield there are helpful. How do you actually counter some of these drones that are, again, relatively cheap, that Russia is now producing en masse, that basically whether you go after, and there's going to be a lot of debate now kind of in the weeks and months leading after this, because do you go after actually the factories in Russia, right, or the suppliers, right? How do you actually try to to disrupt the supply chain that brings all the components for production of these drones. Do you start shooting these drones already over the territory of Ukraine or potentially even Belarus, because some were advocating for that, and this would mean escalation? Or do you focus entirely on your own eastern flank, right? And then the question will be about the availability of resources and the difficult questions about the trade-offs, right? If we do that on our territory, on NATO soil, do we then have less to actually give to Ukraine? Because Ukraine has been fighting this war for Europe.
And on supply chains as well, how far do you go back? Because I think we could be quite confident about the fact that not all of this technology, not all of the supply chain in Russia is homegrown, and some of it might be coming from a little bit further east. Andrew, how's the toast going?
Don't worry, my toast is waiting in the wings, as it were, for the end of the show. And I was just going to say that it's interesting for us here in the UK because obviously we have the state visit of Donald Trump starting on Tuesday. And I imagine that many of the topics that Gorana is talking about will be raised by Keir Starmer directly with President Trump, but also with the people that he's bringing with him, because the desire for some clarity on the US position in this as well is important, because I think we hear all this talk about troops being pulled out from the Baltic. We hear Mr. Trump saying, any minute now that Russia will face more sanctions, and then they never seem to happen. We've even seen some easing of sanctions against Belarus this week. So I think there'll be some push for clarity on all sorts of topics when Mr. Trump comes to town.
And Andrew, meanwhile, back in London, or we can also say maybe meanwhile back in the Anglo world as well, I guess there'll be a PM in position by the time Air Force One lands, but if you look at all of the British papers this morning, and certainly probably over the last 24, 48 hours, of course, the sacking of Peter Mandelson as the UK's ambassador to the US, but then, of course, some documents that Prime Minister Starmer seemed to overlook, and this is really blown up. And anyway, it's also classic Sunday newspaper territory this morning, isn't it?
It's an awful time for Keir Starmer. He's only a year into his premiership. He won a huge mandate, and he has frittered it away, especially over the last few weeks. We saw Angela Rayner, the deputy PM, stepping down because she got involved in some murky, perhaps illegal, but certainly not helpful ways of purchasing a second home. Now we have Mandelson stepping down. And against this, there are some really key issues for Starmer to get his head around. And one of them, of course, is immigration and illegal immigration. And yesterday we saw this far-right march in the centre of London. Where I live, I saw streams of people coming into the city draped in Union Jack flags and in the St. George flag. And the Guardian even estimates at 110,000. I see the organisers are claiming it was closer to 300,000. But without a doubt, it's the biggest far-right demonstration seen in London in a generation. And all these stories oddly stitched together because who was speaking by video link at the rally? Elon Musk. So there's a US element into it. The killing of Charlie Kirk played out in it. So all of these stories have ended up in a swirling storm in the world, but certainly bothering Starmer in everything, every move he makes. He's stuck on the economy, which is flatlining. He's stuck on immigration because they just cannot control these numbers of people arriving illegally. At the moment, he has the ear of President Trump. They've done a huge amount of work on that cause. So that's his only hope, is that this week he can pick out of this some news lines that begin to put him back in a position of being seen as a leader.
Andrew, I want, just on the topic of news lines, I want your editorial wisdom on this one. You touched on Charlie Kirk. It is a story which really is dominating news outlets around the world. Are you surprised? I mean, this is someone that I think if you were sitting, whether you're in Finland or you're reading your paper in Malta or Egypt, did anyone know who Charlie Kirk was earlier in the week? And now it is, of course, really dominating the world. Part of it, of course, it is a U.S. story. It is, of course, linked to the presidency. Are you surprised, though, that we're sort of still on Sunday? Of course, there is, of course, a suspect in custody, etc. but how much this story has taken hold, particularly when we're talking about an actor, of course, dreadful assassination, but at the same time, and we were talking about this just going on air, okay, political violence versus just another day in America as well.
Look, I'd be surprised if many people who knew who Charlie Kirk was here in the UK, of course, some people on the right would have been following his speeches. He was not a big political figure here in the UK, as he was,
or anywhere, I think. But
anyway, no, exactly. But it's what's interesting is there's a good essay in the Telegraph this morning, just looking at, for example, here in the UK, who's supporting the right wing now, and one of the things they light on is a survey which shows that I think it's 1 in 7 young men aged between 18 and 25 say they would now vote for reform, which isn't as far right as the people demonstrating yesterday, but is definitely to the right party. And I think that what we are seeing in America, that maybe the people who supported him, it's interesting when I saw many of the people who came forward to talk about attending his rallies, especially at universities and on college campuses, is young men. So he has this constituency that maybe is a little bit out of our orbit. He certainly had a connection with those people who, for various reasons, feel that their voices are not being heard in the political debate. But yeah, I am surprised at the how quickly that story is taken off here. And again, yesterday on the march, numerous people, it seems, were holding up banners declaring their support for Charlie Kirk and his family. And then even strangely, I saw that Coldplay stopped their concert to ask the audience to pray for Charlie Kirk's family as an act of unity and friendship across the divide, I guess. So it's a funny story that everybody feels it seems some need to comment on.
And maybe just with two guests here in studio, Andrew as well. Nico, just your response to it, as I said, you were commenting on this piece about the fact that this is gun violence, nothing new. It's amazing as well, amidst all of this, that no one even sort of talks about, of course, gun reform or anything around this. 4 years ago, there would have been much more of an outcry about having obviously a high-powered rifle, all of these types of things, not even part of the discussion anymore.
So I think, first to answer your earlier question also to Andrew, why has the story taken hold? I think part of it is also the way it's been documented. There's videos of it, right? So there's a certain element also of this just being quite extreme. We're maybe not used to seeing such things literally live streamed on the internet. What strikes me though, and I think that's sort of a pattern that maybe has been repeated in some of the other acts of political violence in the US over the last years, is that yes, they're political in the sense that they're targeting politicians or people who are politically active or commenting on politics like Charlie Kirk. And yes, probably the shooters acted out of some sort of vaguely political motive, but this is not, it's always a bit murky, right? So if we look at this shooter that was apprehended now, it's not clear cut. And I've seen sort of completely different stories of sort of, he was actually even more far right, and this happened because supposedly Kirk wasn't far right enough or whatever. But then there's also the other story. So my sense is really this isn't so much about political violence, is here almost maybe the wrong term. This isn't so much about political violence as about violence, and especially gun violence in the US, just becoming normalized to a horrifying degree. And it kind of spilling over into politics. I don't think that's, and I also think that means it's not, we shouldn't hope for all these calls for unity that you hear invariably every time this happens. They're never going to work because political polarization is a problem. I don't think that's what's driving the violence. I think the violence is kind of almost a separate phenomenon that would have to be addressed probably on a regulatory basis. And there's probably exactly zero chance of this happening.
Just Gorana, just very quickly before we get to the bottom of the hour, but Andrew, I want to come back to you, and Emma, stand by. We'll be a bit late coming to the news, but just your take on this as well in terms of the narrative that is taken hold. Of course, these stories will move on. But I think, as Andrew is pointing out, it's interesting how different people now around the world, as the story plays out, are latching on to this.
Yeah, I would question how well known or unknown Charlie Kirk actually was around the world, because I still follow Australian media very closely, and I saw that just over the past couple of days there were also some rallies and wakes in the memory of Charlie Kirk in Sydney, downtown, sort of Hyde Park, just opposite of St. Mary's Cathedral. So kind of pretty central place where usually these protest movements start. So I do think that there is something more here, and that is that there is this whole social media ecosystem that is not just Anglospheric, it goes far beyond that, where there is a lot of learning from across both sides of the Atlantic Ocean, and the sort of proponents of the particular political views and ideas that are of Charlie Kirk's ilk are well known, and we can now start, kind of debating how do we label them. Are they hard right, far right, extreme right, and so on. But I think that misses the point. There is something that is quite resurgent these days, and that they are these movements that are anti-immigration, that are very nativist. In the US case, they are pro-gun. There is a lot of undertones of misogyny, of these culture wars, right? They label themselves as anti-woke. All of that, I think that we would find, engaging in a comparative analysis, there is a lot there that very much rhymes across different geographies. So I'm not quite surprised that there has been such a sort of a reaction across different countries to Charlie Kirk's assassination, because I think in one way, by making him a martyr, they are enforcing this sort of idea that there are culture wars or even political wars going on even in their countries, and that this is a sort of just one kind of piece of evidence, but very, very vivid one, because the imagery is there and quite stark, and that has also opened up other debates, but about we are being attacked, right, because of what we believe in and so on. And I think that, again, in that sort of immediate aftermath in the US, there were a lot of these questions about whether the shooter was Antifa, whether he was, like a proponent of a woke ideology that made him do this. There were immediately these types of accusations. So, and again, that translates well to what we are seeing, again, not just in the United States. It's a thing in Britain, in Australia, in, continental Europe in general. And my worry is actually one of the legitimization of violence in general in the United States, of violent words that lead to violent actions, and the fact that we are now at this point in the United States where political ideology has become identity. And identity is something, in this case, that's quite immutable. And if people just sort of firm up in these types of beliefs, right, we know what that might lead to, right, in and out groups. And I think that these are, we were talking about wake-up calls and turning points, but this is one of these inflection points that comes off the heels of various other, assassination attempts of Trump, political, actually, assassination of representatives in Minnesota and similar, that I worry where this keeps on leading as the country becomes more militarized, as violence becomes more legitimized.
Andrew, just before we go, there's a piece, quite a spicy piece by Camilla Long in the Sunday Times today, which she's saying that this is not a wake-up call. She's like, we're in it. We've been living this, etc. Just going back to you seeing sort of the protests leading into London yesterday. I know it's sort of hard to, of course, look across Q4 from a UK perspective as well. But do we see leadership change? And then is this the scale of this rally in London yesterday? Does this really sort of lead to what could also be a very spicy autumn in the UK?
On Monday, apparently, the first people on this tiny scheme we now have with France for one in, one out, where we send back people who've come here illegally and take somebody who probably has a right to settle here, begins. But it's minuscule. I think on the immigration question, and it was interesting when you look at the crowds yesterday, there were plenty of people marching yesterday who were not white British people, marching against unfettered controls on immigration. So it's across the divide. There's a sense that I think that this would calm down if we had a process of immigration that was seen as fairness, even if it did bring people to this country. So would never please some on the far right, but I think it's this sense of injustice, and that injustice is rattling through everything that is facing Starmer, whether it's the economics, whether it's immigration, and that's his problem. I don't think he's going to be toppled. These things always drag on and will be slow, but I think he apparently he was screaming at his aides when the Mandelson story broke, saying that you're meant to protect me. So I think he knows that he's in trouble. But I think what happens in Q4, the only hope is, as I said, that when Trump comes to town, for example, he's bringing in his wake Sam Altman. He's bringing the head of NVIDIA. So I think they hope to announce some big tech deals in the coming days. But we've seen the collapse of these pharma deals as well in the last week. So it's a pretty awful time for the UK, for Starmer, and for anybody who wishes this country was kind of heading in a more sunnier direction.
But meanwhile, at Sunny Midori House, we have a new issue coming out.
We do, and annoyingly, you've already got a copy. Mine's arriving on Monday morning, the preview of this. But yes, we
well, that's what happens when we're just a truck ride away, and we're not having to sort of battle all the traffic in the English Channel.
Exactly, and we had tube strikes this week as well. Maybe that all played into it. No, but we have a big Sunny issue coming out, which we returned to Jakarta, for example, in the expo to look at what was happening there as a young generation are determined to turn that city around. We have a renewed look at some of the big hospitality openings happening, including the News Rosewood here in London. A good bumper issue, and I think your first review gave it a thumbs up as well, TB.
Absolutely. So, and we can of course reflect on it when it arrives on the tube. Strikes are over next week, or I mean from tomorrow, I believe, or I guess already now.
Thank goodness. And one just tiny fun thing this week, the city didn't stop because of the tube strikes. People got cycling and walking, and it was quite when it wasn't pouring down the rain. It was quite amazing. I hats off to Lime, the bike company, the electric bike company, because they did some amazing advertising around town. They put up these electronic posters that said Bakerloo Lime, Central Lime. And it said all services running perfectly. So they which is one of those pieces of spontaneous guerrilla advertising, which I take my hat off to.
Yeah, and a week where levity was required. Andrew, have a lovely Sunday. Emma Nelson, I don't think we've ever been so late coming to you with the news as we approach 10:37 here in Zurich, 9:37 in London.
Thank you very much indeed, Tyler. Russia has fired a Zircon hypersonic cruise missile at a target in the Barents Sea during the Zapad military exercises. The Russian Defence Ministry said the target was destroyed by a direct hit. Romania has reported an incursion into its airspace by a Russian drone. Fighter jets were scrambled in response. The number of people in Japan aged 100 or older has risen to a record high of nearly 100,000 people. Government figures show the number of centenarians in Japan was 99,763 as of this month. And a farmer in the United States was surprised to find the police banging on her door one evening, investigating reports that a woman was being attacked. Officers had traced the sound of screaming to Devon Hawes Farm in Maine. When they arrived, they discovered the source of the noise was Mrs. Hawes' pet goat, Simon. We took the officers to the barn and introduced them to Simon, she said. I don't know how to make a goat be quiet. Those are the headlines. Back to you, Tyler, in Zurich. Do you want to hear Simon?
Yeah, okay, listen, you set us up for that. Let's have a listen.
We have Simon.
Horrifying.
It's quite God. I mean, the poor Maine state troopers. That's quite. Where did you? Where was this? Where did you find Simon?
It's where did I find? Well, they found Simon in the barn. Yeah. Simon's quite widely all over the internet this morning. He really is. He's quite a popular goat.
Wow! Thank you very much.
You need an exorcist for Simon, I think.
On that note, we're heading to New Delhi now. Our correspondent there, Lyndee Prickitt, is standing by. Good afternoon.
Hello. I have to say there are a lot of Simons here in New Delhi and across.
I don't know if we want to have any more sound checks as well. You set us up at the start of the program with a couple of stories, and of course we've got two good sparring partners in studio as well today. But Lyndee, where do you want to start?
Oh, well, let's just start with India on the international stage, because that's the favorite topic here. There's still been a lot of chatter about India and its place on the global stage. People are still talking about the U-turn U.S. President Trump made in the last few weeks when he first made a series of sarcastic comments about Prime Minister Modi cozying up to China and Russian presidents. Do you remember at a recent summit? It was clear that Trump was irked, though many pundits here have been saying that it was poor chess move of his own making, sort of, getting them, the three of them, into a corner together. And interestingly, he did seem to walk back from his sarcasm and sounding a little more conciliatory, which, people made lots of hay out of that here, and loved to see that football going back and forth. But though the U.S. has doubled down on the 50% tariffs and sanction on India's import of Russian oil, it's and of course, the U.S. is asking the EU to do the same. That hasn't stopped India trying to sideline the U.S. by moving to conclude a very big trade deal with the EU. Just a few nights ago, the great and the good from all the U.S. embassies were being hosted at a very swanky hotel by the trade minister, pushing the India-EU free trade agreement. Now, it's been in the works for the last 2 decades, okay? But everybody is saying that now the momentum is real, and many suspect it will finally close in the coming months, with a lot of credit going to Mr. Trump. But we'll see. As the adage goes, there's many a slip between the lip and the cup, so we'll have to see how that unfolds. But there's a lot of optimism here about that.
Nico, just of course, before going on air, we were talking about, really India's position on the world stage. Not that it's never exited that stage, but where it's going, and maybe I think just obviously through the lens of course, its relation, Delhi's relationship with Beijing.
Right. So you'll remember that when Trump put 50% tariffs on India, there were quite a few stories saying that this would sort of push India into Beijing's arms. The two countries had been at loggerheads for a few years following a deadly clash on a disputed border in 2020. But already last year at the BRICS summit, there seems to have been some sort of re-engagement and normalization. And the assumption was that this would continue. Obviously, the images that we've seen come out of the summit of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization in Tianjin, which Lyndee referred to, as well sort of reinforced that narrative. And there is clearly a certain amount of normalization going on between the two countries, which, by the way, I keep telling people we should all be really grateful for, because I think there's in the Western commentariat some angst that India and China would sort of, create an alliance and that would be bad for us. I don't think that's going to happen. And I much prefer those two countries having normal relations, except of sort of always being sort of the brink of conflict. They're the two most populous countries on the planet, and they both happen to have nuclear weapons. So we should be glad that they're talking. I think if we look at the bigger strategic picture, just there's somewhat of limited room for there to be a grand bargain between India and China. As I mentioned, they have a range of disputed borders. And India, I think, just will have always a problem with a dominant China in the region. And you also remember India and Pakistan fought a short war skirmish, whatever you want to call that, earlier this year. And Pakistan used a lot of Chinese supplied weapons. And I think that's also the reason why Modi went to the summit in Tianjin. We didn't stay for the military parade. No Indian prime minister can be seen next to Chinese hardware. So I do think this whole sort of shift from India to China is somewhat overblown. And I also assume that the India-US relationship will normalize again from where it is currently.
Just, Lyndee, I want to go and talk about this GDP bump quickly, but just how did that play out in the Indian press? If I was looking at the Hindustan Times, whatever, on the day, in real time, because of course there's going to be the international lens and how this, of course, was viewed. But if we look at in the domestic press, what's your recollection of what stood out?
Well, the number itself stood out, and everybody was very excited about it. But if you went, and it was surprising, like it was sort of seen as, wow, the surprise 7.8 growth, and then Fitch coming in and saying, okay, we're going to revise the ratings, India's full year outlook upward, calling it a moment of resilience and broad-based momentum in the economy. But if you dug a little deeper, a lot of editorials were saying, hey, this was all part of the plan, folks. We knew this was going to happen. This is the India economic growth strategy. So there was that sort of, there's that hedging of the bets that happens here where everybody's sort of like always able to take both perspectives really quickly. So there was both surprise and a sort of smug, we knew this was going to happen.
Just to tell us, of course, there's always, and we're in a country, Switzerland, of course, which always seems to be the backdrop, but not just, of course, for Bollywood dance scenes, maybe not so much of late, but certainly of late, weddings of serious scale, the big Indian families always frequently passing through here. You've got an interesting inheritance story for us.
Oh, yes. And I will have to say the Swiss ambassador recently told me, the outgoing ambassador recently told me that India is still huge tourism market for them. So there's definitely that link. And as you say, it's a Bollywood link too. Well, right here, there is a massive family drama unfolding, not on screen, but in court, with shouting lawyers, Bollywood stars, and billionaires as the leading cast. And it sadly began with the sudden death of a businessman called Sanjay Kapoor, who was the scion of a leading auto part manufacturer. Well, he was only 53 when he died while playing polo in Windsor. He was originally married. He was married and had 2 children with an actress called Karisma Kapoor, who comes from one of Bollywood's most elite acting families, by the way. Well, her children have recently filed a civil suit claiming they've been cut out of their father's $3.4 billion estate. Because you see, weeks after his death, a will surfaced in which he allegedly left everything to his third wife, Priya Sachdev, who was also a Bollywood actress for a stint, though more known as a model and socialite. And she has a 6-year-old daughter with a 6-year-old son with Sanjay Kapoor. Well, the older children say they weren't told that the new will had existed. And now they're accusing Priya of forgery and demanding full disclosure. Priya insists that the children already received millions and millions of crores or dollars through the family trust, but their lawyers are saying, nope, they were excluded from key meetings and misled about their entitlements. And if I can pause for a moment on the lawyers, well, 2 of India's most famous and expensive lawyers were representing both sides, and they don't hold their punches. There was a massive argument in court just a few days ago where there were back and forth lines like, don't interrupt me, I'm not used to interruptions, countered with, you should get a taste of your own medicine, I'm no pushover. And you can guess it. This 21-second banter in court has now become a very popular video that the public is absolutely lapping up here.
I'm not sure if Emma's got a clip back in London of that or not. Lyndee, thank you very much. Have a good week in the capital, and great having you on the program. You're listening to Monocle on Sunday. Just going 10:47 here. I'm, of course, here with Grgić, also Nico Luchsinger from the Asia Society. Any thoughts and reflections on big billionaire battles over potentially stolen fortunes? Not really.
Not on this story per se. I would say linking this with the very positive GDP news coming out of India, that's certainly a story to watch. Though, if you look again at the big picture, 7.8% growth is fantastic, right? Everybody would love for their economy to grow 7.8%. But if India really wants to sort of go through the China story of long, multi-decade growth, that number would actually need to be much, much, much higher. And I think one of the challenges that the country faces is actually that there's a relative strong income and wealth disparity evidenced by billionaires and their weddings, but there's just still a huge amount of the population that lives on much less, and that imbalance has actually been growing as of late. And I think that's a challenge the country would still need to address if it were to go through the sustained growth that I think it needs to sort of catch up.
Indeed. Just kind of, and just on that point, I'm always sort of curious, okay, we've just had Lyndee on from New Delhi, your take on sort of Canberra's view, because I think we had a period where, again, of course, massive Indian diaspora in Australia, and that things were sort of going to warm up for a while. And of course, we always sort of see a little bit of sort of, flip-flopping on people sort of, bilateral views that they might have with India. Where are we right now in particularly, I think, thinking about, what's happening at the bottom end of the South Pacific?
Well, I think Canberra strategically has been very much in the sort of camp, engage India, bring it into Quad more firmly, try to sort of pull it away from, first of all, Russia's orbit in a little, and then, of course, now these sort of China rapprochement moves. But I would also agree very much with Nico. The macro structurals here, the strategic sort of landscape looks more like India is going to keep on pressing what it has been doing, and that's this sort of idea of multi-alignment rather than necessarily putting all of its eggs in one basket. The reasons are multifold. It has huge interest to, of course, engage with China together. They have about 3 billion people, in terms of markets and sort of access there, but also with Russia, of course, traditionally a huge sort of opportunity for cheap exports of gas from Russia to India and arms. So some of these things are historic and again need to be put into a context. But just one thing about Canberra, there has been a story developing, and that's more the political, domestic kind of side of things in Australia after one of the senators from the coalition, which is in opposition at the moment, has actually vilified the Indian community for being pro-Labour Party, and there have been huge sort of political costs now for the opposition leader, Susan Lee, after the statements were made that basically Indian immigrants in Australia are all voting for Labour, and therefore Indian immigration should be stopped. So this has been making rounds now for the past 2 weeks and giving a lot of headache to the opposition leader, who has said that such statements should not be repeated or ever uttered, and the senator in question isn't backing down.
Gorana, thanks for that. Is just coming up to 10:51 here in Zurich. And on the topic of Zurich, the 21st edition of the film festival is upon us. Yes, if you're passing through town, of course, it's one of the biggest sort of, I would say, temporary construction sites. Happens not too far from where our studios are right now. I'm happy to say Christian Jungen, the festival director, is with us this morning. Good to see you. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
We're just, I guess, if we cross the Atlantic, the Toronto International Film Festival is just wrapping up today, I believe, and then pretty much everything sort of swings to this side of the Atlantic. For those listeners, let's say TIFF has become, really quite a centerpiece in North America. Where does the Zurich Film Festival fit? How much of it would you say is a B2B play, where deals are happening and of course there's big premieres, versus also being, it really sort of takes over the city as well as also a B2C play. So where do you sit?
Well, we have two phases. We're a big audience festival. We had 140,000 tickets sold last year. It's tracking over last year for this year, so the outlook is good. And on the other hand, we are also a market where deals are finalized that couldn't get closed at Toronto. So all these studio heads and producers, they fly from Toronto over to Europe, do some business in Paris and London, and then come to the Zurich Film Festival, where we have a Zurich Summit Conference up at the Dolder, which is known for being the Davos of the film industry, where the leaders from Hollywood meet their European counterparts, and there is actually a lot of business done. In terms of films, the Zurich Film Festival 21 years ago started by saying we want to become the Sundance of Europe. In the meantime, I would say we're more the Toronto of Europe, because Sundance is in January, and if a film is hot in January, it's out on a platform in March or April. So we've become more and more a pure autumn fall festival, and we are also an important stop for all those films heading towards the Oscar. They love to come here to get some prestige for their pictures, and since we have a carpet and lots of press, they can get a lot of publicity out of Zurich.
So it's interesting when you talk about that there's this jump almost from Toronto that deals then that the conversations that might have started, things conclude, close, maybe contracts are drawn up. Is that, would you say, a new innovation? That is something that you've sort of built towards? It was, and I guess you said, okay, it's idea of being Sundance or something very different, but you occupy a different space that maybe was not in the strategic planning if we rewind 10 years ago.
Absolutely not. We kind of happened to end up there because everybody is coming, finishing deals. We're this boutique festival where they all stay up at the Dolder in the same hotel, running into each other in the lobby, and finally have time to talk to each other. So we have a good position in the calendar. And again, the Oscars are something that's helping us very much because we're centrally located in Europe. So if Netflix wants to make sure the European voters see a film, it's easy to bring in people from Munich, Berlin, London, Paris, or Italy. And that has become almost a festival in the festival, these whole activities around the award season. So
here we are in very neutral Switzerland, also multilingual Switzerland as well. Do you also own a patch in Mitteleuropa in that sense that also there is, okay, of course, let's not ignore the likes of Berlin, etc., but that you also play a role in a German space, but maybe also as much in a French space and not just the Romandie and with the Italians as well? Or is it even much more flat and international, you would say?
We're international for the industry. There are really coming a lot of people from the US, also journalists. One of the most important trade papers is called Deadline. They will be here with 10 journalists, just to give you an idea of how important Zurich is for the industry. And in terms of audience, we're attracting more and more people from the south of Germany, from Geneva especially. When I took over 6 years ago, we only sold 0.4% of tickets in the Swiss romande. In the meantime, we're over 4%. It's not dramatic, but it's growing. And the other growth market is people from Paris, because it's easy. It's a 4-hour train ride, and we're becoming more and more international. And it's funny, I get asked a lot, what's the position in the calendar? Where does Zurich play? And I'm happy that The Guardian recently ran a charts with the most important film festival and put us number 10. So it was the only film festival not founded after the war, but of recent founding. It's only 21 years old. And if it was football, I could say we're playing Champions League.
Okay, so I know again you have to play a neutral position, but what's the excitement about in terms of premieres, first outing for something that people are going to see here in Zurich?
Well, first of all, the local audience is very generous. If you bring a Hollywood star, and this year we have Benedict Cumberbatch or Russell Crowe attending, everybody is excited. While in Paris or in London, you have big premieres every single week. The second factor that is important, these stars, they love to come. We living here in Zurich sometimes forget that how exciting of a city it is. It's small, it's clean, there is a good airport, we have tremendous hotels. And the Zurich Film Festival, like the destination of Zurich in tourism, is a secondary destination. We're not Cannes or Venice or Toronto, but for those who have been there, it's an important second market. And a lot of film that premiered a bit unnoticed in Toronto can kickstart their career here. A couple of years ago, All Quiet on the Western Front by Edward Berger, who, by the way, is from Zurich, from this neighborhood. We're doing this radio show here. His film was unnoticed in Toronto. He came to Zurich, and it was actually here that the film got some buzz and heat and went up winning Oscars.
Great. Christian Jungen, director of the Zurich Film Festival. Great seeing you. I think there'll be, probably many people around the mic here over the coming weeks as well. So wishing you a very good festival. Just before we go, Gorana, putting you on the spot in 15 or 20 seconds or less. One story you're watching this coming week.
Andrew already previewed it and hinted at it already. Trump is visiting UK for the second unprecedented state visit, so we'll see what he does and whether there'll be some royal faux pas or whether they'll manage to win him over and make him support Europe more.
And Nico, over to you.
Well, for better or worse, I think that's the story we'll all be watching. But in the meantime, I will also be looking for signs of how what's happening in Asia is influencing Europe. We touched upon it briefly today. India, EU, you mentioned Chinese support for Russia, and I think increasingly those are the stories to look out for.
Excellent. We're going to have to leave it there, everyone. Nico Luchsinger, also Gorana Grgić, our security correspondent. Also Emma Nelson back in London. Thank you. Also Andrew Tuck, Lyndee Prickitt, and Christian Jungen from the Film Festival. Our show is produced by Desiree Bentley and also Emma Nelson. And of course, we had Mariella Bevan managing things back in London as well. I'll be in the south of France next week, but I'll be checking in from there. I'm Tyler Brûlé. Have a very good week. Goodbye.